My mother left the interview smiling at the HR director as if she had taken my place. In the hallway, motionless with my resume in hand, I felt my career and confidence crumble in seconds. The morning had begun with controlled anxiety that had accompanied me for weeks since I received the call confirming my interview for the digital marketing manager position at my dream company, a renowned multinational that offered exactly the type of professional challenge I had been seeking after years working in smaller agencies, building my experience and waiting for the perfect opportunity that had finally arrived. I woke up at 5:30 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than necessary, because my body simply refused to relax, given the importance of that moment that could completely change the course of my professional career and personal life. I took a long shower with warm water, carefully chose my most elegant gray suit, the one I had bought specifically for important occasions like this, and spent 40 minutes perfectly arranging my brown hair, practicing in the mirror the answers I had rehearsed hundreds of times during the last 3 weeks of intense preparation. My mother, Marta, was in the kitchen preparing a hearty breakfast when I came down the stairs of our house, where I was still living temporarily while saving money for my own apartment after a difficult separation that had consumed my savings in lawyers and division of assets. "Daughter, you look beautiful. I'm sure you'll nail this interview," she said with enthusiasm that seemed genuine, while serving scrambled eggs and whole wheat toast on the flower-decorated plate we always used for special occasions. Her voice carried that protective maternal tone I had known since childhood, but there was something subtle in her gestures that I couldn't fully identify. A nervous agitation disguised as excitement that made her hands tremble slightly while handling the white porcelain cup. "Thank you, Mom. I'm really hopeful about this opportunity. It's exactly the type of company I've always dreamed of working for," I replied, nibbling on a toast that tasted like cardboard due to the anxiety that completely closed my stomach. During what should have been a reassuring breakfast, I noticed my mother was asking very specific questions about the company, about the exact time of the interview, about the interviewer's name, and even about the precise location of the room where the meeting that would define my professional future would be held. "What floor is the Human Resources Department on again? And what's the name of the director who will interview you?" she asked with curiosity that seemed excessive, mentally noting every detail that I innocently shared, thinking it was just maternal interest in her daughter's well-being. I explained it would be on the 12th floor, room 1223, with Mr. Ricardo, Human Resources Director, at 9 o'clock sharp, and that I planned to arrive at least 30 minutes early to calm down and review my notes one last time. Marta smiled in a way that now seems strange as I recall, nodding positively and mumbling something about how important it was to be punctual in important professional situations. I finished my coffee quickly, grabbed my brown leather folder where I kept extra copies of my resume, recommendation letters, and a notepad with intelligent questions I planned to ask about the company, and headed to the garage where my car, a used but well-maintained Civic, was waiting for me for the most important journey of my professional life. "Good luck, my daughter. I'm sure everything will work out exactly as it should," shouted my mother from the kitchen door, waving with a wide smile that should have reassured me, but that inexplicably left me with a strange feeling in my stomach, as if something wasn't completely right in that seemingly affectionate and normal farewell. The morning traffic was heavier than usual, transforming the usual 20 minutes of travel into 40. 5 minutes of growing tension as I watched the dashboard clock marking each passing minute, mentally calculating if I would still arrive at the planned time or if I would have to run through the company corridors like a desperate and disorganized person, exactly the impression I didn't want to make on first contact with my possible future employer. The streets were congested due to an accident that had blocked 2 lanes of the main avenue, and I nervously drummed my fingers on the steering wheel while trying to stay calm and mentally review the main professional achievements I would highlight during the interview. I turned on the radio to a classical music station, hoping that Vivaldi or Bach could calm my growing nerves. But not even the 4 seasons could diminish the anxiety that made my heart beat at a fast and irregular rhythm. When I finally reached the business building, a modern glass and steel building that rose majestically against the morning blue sky, it was 8:45, leaving me only 15 minutes to find a parking space, go up to the 12th floor, locate the correct room, and mentally recompose myself before the decisive moment. The parking lot was full, typical of business hours, and I had to make 3 complete rounds between the underground floors before finding an available spot on the 3rd basement level, forcing me to run through corridors and escalators in my high heels, echoing on the marble floors, while compulsively checking the clock and calculating if I could still arrive punctually to the most important commitment of my career. I arrived breathless at the 12th floor at 8:58, only 2 minutes late in relation to my original plan, but still within the acceptable time for the interview that was officially scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning. The corridor was elegant and well lit, with abstract paintings on the white walls and a gray carpet that muffled the sound of my steps still accelerated from running from the parking lot. I looked for the room numbers, following the increasing numeration until I found the golden plaque that indicated room 1223 Human Resources, exactly where the conversation that could completely change the course of my professional life should take place. I stopped in front of the frosted glass door, took 3 deep breaths to control my labored breathing and my on-edge nerves, adjusted my hair and my clothes one last time, and was about to knock on the door when I heard voices coming from inside the room. A male voice that I presumed to be Mr. Ricardo's, and a female voice that sounded strangely familiar, but that my anxious mind couldn't immediately identify. "This is a perfect opportunity for someone with my experience and dedication," I heard the female voice say confidently, and something in the tone made me completely stop moving, as if a primitive instinct alerted me that something wasn't right in that situation. I brought my ear closer to the door, trying to better hear the conversation happening on the other side, and the following words made me feel as if the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. "I have 32 years of experience in the job market, and I have always been an extremely responsible person dedicated to everything I do." It was my own mother's voice, talking about my age as if it were hers, describing my qualifications as if they were her own professional achievements. The initial shock was so intense that I needed to lean against the corridor wall to avoid collapsing right there, my mind refusing to process what my ears were capturing with crystal clarity. My own mother was inside the room, pretending to be me, stealing my interview and possibly forever destroying my chance to win the job of my dreams. My first impulse was to immediately knock on the door and interrupt that absurd farce, publicly expose the lie and clarify the embarrassing situation, but something made me hesitate. Perhaps it was the morbid curiosity to discover how far she would be able to take that bizarre performance, or perhaps it was the pure shock of discovering that my own mother had planned to sabotage me in such a cruel and calculated way. I continued listening through the door, each word feeling like a stab in the heart of a daughter who had always blindly trusted the person who gave birth to me. While Marta described with impressive detail my professional trajectory, my most important projects, my technical skills, and even my future dreams within the company, as if she had memorized every line of my resume and cover letter. "I've always had a passion for digital marketing and believe I can significantly contribute to the company's growth," she said with frightening conviction, using words that were literally mine, extracted from conversations we had during weeks of preparation where I nervously shared my plans and expectations for that crucial moment. The naturalness with which she blatantly lied about her own identity made me realize that this sabotage wasn't a momentary impulse, but rather a carefully architected plan made in advance, which made the betrayal even more painful and incomprehensible for a daughter who never imagined such cruelty could come from her own mother. For 15 interminable minutes that felt like hours of psychological torture, I remained paralyzed in the hallway listening to my mother answer technical questions about digital marketing with superficial knowledge she had absorbed from our family conversations, but which was obviously not enough to sustain a serious and in-depth professional interview. I heard Mr. Ricardo asked questions about specific data analysis tools, about social media campaigns I had managed in previous jobs, about quantifiable results listed in my professional portfolio, and realized with growing horror that my mother was making up answers on the spot, creating fictional stories based on fragments of information she had collected by spying on my professional life over the years. Yes, I managed to increase engagement at the previous company by 40% in just 6 months. She lied blatantly, citing a number I had mentioned casually during a family dinner, but applying it to a completely different and inappropriate context. With each incorrect or invented answer that came out of her mouth, I felt my professional reputation being irreversibly tarnished, my credibility being destroyed before I even had the chance to defend it personally. I imagined Mr. Ricardo making negative notes about inconsistencies in my supposed answers, forming a terrible impression about my competence and honesty, not knowing he was being deceived by a woman who had never professionally worked in the field I had studied and practiced for more than a decade. The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming. Watching my career being sabotaged so cruelly by someone who should have been my greatest supporter made me feel as if I were trapped inside a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up, regardless of how much I pinched myself or tried to find a logical explanation for that absurd situation. Finally, I heard the characteristic sound of chairs being pushed back and footsteps heading toward the door, indicating that the interview had ended and that my mother was about to leave that room after systematically destroying 15 years of careful construction of my professional career. I quickly moved a few meters away from the door and pretended to be just arriving at that moment, pretending I had just exited the elevator, trying to appear natural despite the whirlwind of contradictory emotions boiling inside my chest like volcano lava about to explode. The door opened slowly, and my mother appeared first, with a satisfied smile stamped on her face that I will never forget for the rest of my life. A smile of someone who had just committed the perfect crime and felt proud of her own terrible deed. Behind her came Mr. Ricardo, a dark-haired man in his 40s, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather briefcase, who greeted my mother with a cordial handshake and said words that froze the blood in my veins. "It was a pleasure to meet you in person, Beatrice. We'll contact you within a week with our final decision." Hearing my own name being directed at my mother, I felt a mixture of anger, shock, despair, and disbelief that momentarily left me without the capacity to react or speak, observing that surreal scene as if I were an external spectator watching an especially cruel and well-crafted suspense film. Marta saw me in the hallway and her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she managed to recompose her expression into a mask of feigned surprise that didn't fool me for an instant. "Beatrice, what are you doing here, daughter?" she asked with an award-worthy performance. Pretending complete ignorance about the reason for my presence at that location, she knew perfectly well I should be at, for my most important interview. Mr. Ricardo looked confusedly from one to the other, clearly trying to process the strange situation unfolding before his eyes. A woman who had just identified herself as Beatrice being called daughter by another woman with the same name, in a coincidence that defied any logic or reasonable probability. "Mom, this was my interview," I finally managed to say, my voice coming out in a higher tone than I intended, due to the state of shock and indignation that completely dominated my self-control. "I scheduled this interview 3 weeks ago, prepared intensively, and you impersonated me." My accusation echoed through the silent corridor like a war cry, causing some passers-by to stop and observe the family drama that was publicly unfolding in front of the human resources office of a respected company. Ricardo seemed completely lost, looking alternately at both of us while trying to understand if he was witnessing a genuine confusion, an elaborate, distasteful joke, or some kind of corporate scam he had never encountered in his 20 years of experience in human resources. "Excuse me, but I think there's some misunderstanding here," he said diplomatically, nervously adjusting his tie. "Could you explain to me exactly what is happening? Because I just interviewed someone who identified herself as Beatrice for a digital marketing position." The explanation that followed was one of the most embarrassing and painful conversations of my adult life, unfolding in the busy corridor of a company where I dreamed of working, in front of curious employees who pretended not to be paying attention, while clearly absorbing every word of the family drama that was publicly unfolding before their eyes. I tried to explain to Mr. Ricardo that I was the real Beatrice, that I had scheduled that interview weeks ago, that my mother had discovered the details and decided to impersonate me for reasons I still didn't completely understand, but that probably involved some kind of professional jealousy or unhealthy need to control my life. Marta, in turn, tried to minimize the situation with flimsy excuses that only worsened our image before the human resources director. "It was just a joke, Dr. Ricardo. I wanted to see what a modern interview was like since it's been so long since I worked outside the home." Her words sounded pathetic even to me, who knew her ability to invent justifications for inexplicable behaviors, and I could see on Mr. Ricardo's face an expression of growing discomfort that clearly indicated that our family had become a problematic situation he preferred to avoid completely. "Ma'am, what you did constitutes identity fraud, and is also extremely unprofessional," he said with a seriousness that finally made my mother realize the gravity of the situation she had created. "I'm afraid that, due to these irregular circumstances, we cannot proceed with the selection process for either of you." The final words came out like a death sentence for my professional ambitions, and I felt my dream opportunity disintegrating before my eyes due to the incomprehensible sabotage of the person who should be my greatest supporter in the world. We left the building in tense silence that hung in the air like a storm cloud about to explode, me walking several meters ahead of my mother because I couldn't bear to be close to her in that moment of pure anger that boiled in my chest like burning oil. In the elevator, other people present pretended to read documents or fiddle with their phones to avoid witnessing the obvious embarrassment that emanated from the two of us like waves of visible heat, and the silence was broken only by the metallic sound of floors being announced by the computerized voice that echoed in the confined space. When we reached the underground parking lot, I finally exploded with all the fury accumulated during those minutes of shock and forced containment. How could you do this to me? How can a mother sabotage her own daughter in such a cruel way? My voice echoed among the parked cars, creating a dramatic environment that perfectly matched the intensity of the emotions I could finally express freely. Marta tried to approach me with conciliatory gestures, but I instinctively backed away, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional abyss her actions had created between us. Daughter, you don't understand. I just wanted to protect you from disappointment in case you didn't get the job, she said with logic so distorted it made me question her mental sanity. Protect? You destroyed my professional reputation. You lied, deceived, impersonated me, and you still think you were protecting me? My words came out broken by emotion, mixed with tears of anger and frustration that ran down my face uncontrollably. You have no idea what you just did to 15 years of my professional life, to my dreams, to my self-esteem. The discussion in the parking lot dragged on for 20 minutes that seemed like an eternity of accusations, denials, attempts at justification, and emotional outbursts that echoed between the concrete columns, creating a dysfunctional symphony of a family in total crisis. Marta alternated between attempts to minimize her actions. It was just a joke that got out of control. Blaming external circumstances. You were so nervous I thought you might faint. And finally admitting deeper motivations that revealed disturbing aspects of her personality that I had never noticed before. Fine, I admit it. I was jealous seeing you grow professionally while I've been stuck in time since your father retired, she finally confessed, her own tears beginning to well up as her mask of innocence finally fell completely. When you talked about this company, about this amazing job, I felt invisible, useless, as if my life had no value compared to your youth and your opportunities. Her words shocked me with their brutal honesty, but also outraged me by the selfish way she had chosen to deal with her own emotional problems. So you decided to solve your self-esteem problem by destroying my career? That's your solution to feel better? I asked incredulously, wiping away tears with the back of my hand while trying to process the confession that revealed a side of my mother I never imagined existed. You should have sought professional help, talked to me, pursued your own opportunities. Anything but direct sabotage. The parking lot around us seemed an appropriate setting for that moment of painful revelations. Cold, gray, echoing, perfectly reflecting the state of our raw emotions and our family relationship that had been irreversibly shaken. During the journey back home, which we made in separate cars because I absolutely refused to share the same physical space with her. In that moment of intense anger, my mind worked frantically trying to process not only what had happened, but also the long-term implications of that sabotage for my career, my professional reputation, and my family relationship. The traffic that had seemed like an irritating obstacle in the morning had now become an opportunity for forced reflection, where each red light gave me additional time to mentally relive the details of the terrible morning and try to find some way to deal with the devastating consequences. I called my best friend Claudia, using the speakerphone while driving, because I urgently needed to share with someone the surreal experience I had just lived through and that my mind still refused to accept as reality. Claudia, you won't believe what my mother just did to me, I said as soon as she answered, my voice still trembling from the recent emotion. She went to my interview pretending to be me and completely destroyed my chance of getting my dream job. From the other end of the line, I heard a prolonged silence followed by an exclamation of disbelief. What do you mean she pretended to be you? That makes no sense, Beatrice. Tell me everything from the beginning, because I need to properly understand this madness. For the next 15 minutes, I recounted every detail of that nightmare morning, from the suspicious questions during breakfast to the final confrontation in the parking lot, while Claudia listened in respectful silence, making occasional comments of indignation that confirmed to me that my reaction was not being exaggerated or disproportionate. When I finally arrived home, I found my mother sitting in the living room, still wearing the clothes she had chosen to represent the successful professional daughter I should have been that morning, but now with a defeated expression that completely replaced the arrogant confidence she had displayed in the company corridor. She had prepared tea, our traditional family reconciliation drink in times of crisis, but I walked right past her without accepting the peace offering, climbing the stairs toward my room where I could finally process everything that had happened away from the physical presence of the person responsible for my current suffering. Beatrice, please, let's talk like adults, she shouted from the stairs, but her voice sounded small and insecure. completely different from the confident woman who had managed to deceive an experienced human resources director just 2 hours earlier. I locked my bedroom door and threw myself on the bed, still wearing the suit I had carefully chosen to make the best possible impression, now wrinkled and stained by tears that began flowing freely again as soon as I found myself alone in my safe space. I grabbed my laptop and started researching the legal implications of what my mother had done, discovering that identity fraud in a professional context could be considered a crime with serious consequences, although I knew I would never have the courage to sue my own mother regardless of the severity of her actions. The afternoon dragged on slowly as I alternated between crying, anger, online research about the job market, and failed attempts to find a way to repair the damage done to my professional reputation at that specific company, which represented exactly the kind of opportunity that appears only once in a person's lifetime. 3 days passed in a haze of depression, self-recrimination, and frustrated attempts to find a solution to the problem created by maternal sabotage, during which I barely left my room except for silent meals where my mother tried to initiate conciliatory conversations that I systematically ignored. Claudia visited me daily, bringing food, chocolate, and especially compassionate ears for my repeated attempts to process the emotional trauma of discovering that the person I trusted most in the world was capable of such cruel and calculated sabotage. "Beatrice, you need to take some concrete action instead of just crying and feeling sorry for yourself," she said on Thursday afternoon, sitting on my bed while I remained lying in a fetal position, hugging a pillow. "What kind of action?" I asked, my voice muffled by the fabric. "Seek professional help to deal with this. A psychologist, a family therapist, someone who can help you both understand what happened and how to move forward." The suggestion seemed sensible, although the idea of sitting in a room with my mother to discuss our family problems made me nauseous. What if she refuses to participate? What if she doesn't admit she needs help? I questioned, finally raising my head to look at my friend, who showed infinite patience with my deplorable state. "Then you go alone first," she responded pragmatically. "You need to process your own emotions before trying to solve relationship problems. Besides, you need to decide if you want to try to rebuild this relationship, or if you prefer to establish definitive boundaries." Her words made sense, but the prospect of making definitive decisions about my family scared me almost as much as the prospect of continuing to live with someone capable of such deep betrayals. It was Claudia who researched and found Dr. Silva, a psychologist specializing in dysfunctional family dynamics who practiced just 10 blocks from our house, logistically facilitating the beginning of a therapeutic process that I knew was necessary, but emotionally terrified me. The first appointment was scheduled for the following Friday, and I spent the previous days oscillating between relief at finally having a concrete direction to deal with my situation and anxiety about having to report to a stranger the most intimate and embarrassing details of my family life. On the morning of the appointment, I wore comfortable clothes instead of the professional outfit that still hung in my closet as a painful reminder of that fateful morning, and walked to the office taking deep breaths at each block to control the anxiety that made my stomach churn as if I were about to do another important interview. Dr. Silva's office was a welcoming environment with brown leather armchairs, shelves filled with psychology books, and a large window that let in enough natural light to create a calming atmosphere that immediately made me feel more relaxed than I had felt in days. Dr. Silva was a 52-year-old man with well-trimmed gray hair and kind brown eyes that conveyed the experience of someone who had heard many complicated family stories throughout decades of clinical practice. He greeted me with a firm but warm handshake, offered me water or tea, and waited patiently while I settled into the armchair that would be my refuge during the next weeks of intensive therapy. "Beatrice, tell me what brought you here today," he said with a calm and professional voice that encouraged me to begin by reporting the events of the previous week, from the seemingly normal breakfast to the final confrontation in the company parking lot. For 50 minutes, I completely unburdened myself about maternal betrayal, about my emotional confusion, about the feeling of having lost not only a professional opportunity, but also trust in the most important person in my life. Dr. Silva listened attentively, making occasional notes and formulating questions that helped me process aspects of the situation that I hadn't previously considered. "What hurts you more in this situation? The loss of the professional opportunity or the breach of family trust?" he asked during one of the pauses, and I realized I couldn't completely separate these two aspects of the trauma. "I think it's the breach of trust," I answered after a few minutes of reflection. "I can try to get a job elsewhere, but how can I trust my own mother again?" His next question made me think about aspects I had consciously avoided. Can you identify other moments in your life where your mother demonstrated controlling or invasive behaviors, even if on a smaller scale? Dr. Silva's question opened a Pandora's box of memories that I had buried or rationalized over the years, revealing a pattern of controlling and manipulative behavior that had begun long before the interview sabotage. I recalled how she always found ways to interfere in my romantic relationships, making negative comments about my boyfriends or creating awkward situations when I brought them home, until eventually they drifted away, unable to handle the constant family pressure. I also remembered how she had accidentally ruined my favorite outfit on the eve of an important college party, or how she always appeared with urgent family commitments on days when I had important plans with friends or colleagues. My God, Dr. Silva. I had never connected these dots before, I said as the memories organized themselves into a clear sequence of subtle and constant sabotage. She has always done this, always found ways to keep me dependent on her and to interfere when I tried to build my own life. The psychologist nodded understandingly. Often, dysfunctional family patterns develop gradually, becoming so normalized that we don't recognize them until something dramatic, like this situation, forces us to reevaluate everything. During the remainder of the session, we explored concepts such as emotional dependence, maternal narcissism, and the psychological need some mothers feel to maintain absolute control over their adult children's lives. I left the office with a list of reflection exercises, a reading recommendation about healthy family boundaries, and mainly with a new perspective that helped me understand that the problem wasn't just about a sabotaged interview, but about decades of subtle manipulation that had finally escalated to direct and undeniable sabotage. The revelation that my mother had demonstrated manipulative patterns throughout my adult life left me simultaneously relieved to finally understand and indignant for having been blind to these manipulations for so long. During the days following the first consultation, I began to systematically reevaluate our family relationship, identifying specific moments where she had used guilt, emotional blackmail, or subtle sabotage to maintain control over my important decisions. I spoke at length with my older sister, Patricia, who lived in another city and had an external perspective on our family dynamics that I had never seriously considered. Beatrice, I've always noticed how Mom acts differently when you're starting to succeed in some area of life. Patricia revealed during a 2-hour call that became an informal family therapy session. Remember when you were promoted at your second-to-last company? She got sick exactly during the week of your celebration party, forcing you to cancel everything to take care of her. But when I went to visit her, she was perfectly fine and shopping normally. My sister's revelations confirmed my new therapeutic insights and made me realize that I wasn't imagining patterns where they didn't exist. Other family members had also noticed strange behaviors that I had rationalized as protective maternal love. Patricia told me about at least 5 specific situations where our mother had created family dramas or false emergencies exactly when I was about to achieve important milestones in my personal or professional life. A pattern so consistent that it couldn't be coincidence. Why did you never tell me anything about this before? I asked indignantly. Because I thought you already knew and had chosen to accept this behavior, she answered honestly. And also because it's very difficult to confront a mother about this kind of thing. You know how dramatic she gets when she's contradicted. Armed with these new perspectives and with the emotional support from therapy sessions, I finally decided to confront my mother directly about the whole situation, but this time in a planned and controlled manner, instead of the emotional outbursts I had in the company parking lot. I scheduled a formal conversation for a Sunday afternoon, when we would have complete privacy at home, and spent the previous week mentally preparing the main points I wanted to address, practicing ways to keep calm, even if she tried to use her usual emotional manipulation tactics. When the moment for the conversation arrived, I found my mother in the living room, waiting nervously, clearly aware that something important was about to happen. She had prepared tea and cookies, her usual strategy to make difficult conversations more welcoming, but this time I politely refused the offer, keeping focus on the objective of our discussion. Mom, I need to talk seriously about what happened at the company, but also about broader patterns in our relationship that I've identified with professional help, I began, using the firm but respectful tone I had practiced during therapy sessions. It's not just about the sabotaged interview, but decades of controlling behavior that culminated in that extreme situation. I saw her expression immediately change to the defensive mode I knew so well. Eyes slightly widened, tense body posture, preparing to deny or minimize any accusation I might make. Daughter, I think you're exaggerating things. Maybe this psychologist is putting ideas in your head, she said, trying to disqualify my new perspective before even fully hearing my arguments. Mom, I need you to listen to me completely before responding, because this conversation is crucial for the future of our relationship. I insisted, maintaining the emotional control I had developed through therapeutic sessions. For 40 minutes, that felt like hours. I systematically exposed all the manipulative patterns I had identified, citing specific examples from my adolescence to the recent sabotage, documenting a consistent history of interference and control that she couldn't easily deny or rationalize. Marta tried several of her usual tactics. Initial denial. That never happened. Minimization. You're exaggerating normal situations. Blame reversal. You've always been a very sensitive daughter. And finally, dramatic tears. You're being very cruel to me. But this time, prepared by therapy sessions and determined to establish healthy boundaries, I maintained my focus on concrete facts without letting myself be diverted by emotional manipulation. Mom, your tears won't change the facts of what happened or the patterns I've identified, I said with firmness that surprised me. I need to know if you recognize these behaviors and if you're willing to work to change them, or if you prefer that I establish stricter boundaries in our relationship. The clear ultimatum finally made her defenses begin to crumble. And for the first time in my adult life, I saw my mother really listening to my words, instead of just waiting for her turn to respond with more manipulation. I never thought about these situations that way, she finally admitted, wiping tears that now seemed genuine instead of performative. Maybe I am really jealous of your success. Maybe I'm afraid of being alone if you become completely independent. Her partial admission was a first step, but I knew that real changes would require much more than just verbal acknowledgement of the problems. I proposed that we do some family therapy sessions together, a non-negotiable condition for me to consider continuing to live in the same house and maintaining a close relationship with her. Initially, Marta resisted the idea, claiming that normal people solve problems within the family without needing strangers. But my firmness in making this an absolute requirement for our reconciliation eventually convinced her to accept at least a few experimental sessions. I scheduled 3 joint sessions with Dr. Silva for the following 2 weeks, and spent that period mentally preparing the main points I wanted to address in the presence of a professional mediator who could prevent our dysfunctional dynamic from completely dominating the conversation. The first family session was tense and uncomfortable, with my mother demonstrating obvious resistance to the psychologist's presence and trying to maintain a perfect family facade that quickly disintegrated when Dr. Silva began asking direct questions about specific events. Mrs. Marta, how do you explain the decision to attend a job interview pretending to be your daughter? He asked straightforwardly, forcing her to directly confront her actions instead of hiding behind vague justifications. I watched, fascinated, as my mother tried her usual manipulation tactics with a trained professional, only to discover they didn't work with someone who understood exactly what was happening. For 90 minutes, Dr. Silva systematically dissected our family dynamic, identifying specific patterns, establishing clear responsibilities, and proposing concrete strategies for change, all while maintaining a controlled environment where I felt safe to honestly express my feelings without fear of emotional retaliation. The 3 family therapy sessions produced limited but significant progress. My mother finally admitted she had developed an unhealthy emotional dependence on me, acknowledged that some of her past behaviors were inappropriate, and agreed to individually work on herself, esteem and abandonment issues. However, it became clear that profound changes would take months or years to consolidate, and that I needed to establish immediate boundaries to protect my own mental health while she worked on her problems. With Dr. Silva's guidance, I developed a plan of concrete changes that included finding my own apartment within 2 months, establishing specific times for family contact and visits, creating clear consequences for future manipulative behaviors, and mainly, rebuilding my professional career without maternal interference or help. Marta accepted these conditions with obvious reluctance, but the formal agreement mediated by a professional gave her less room to negotiate or sabotage my plans. During our last joint session, Dr. Silva had us create a written family contract, establishing specific expectations for both sides and clear consequences for violations of the established boundaries. Healthy family relationships require mutual respect and appropriate boundaries, he explained as we reviewed the document. True love means supporting the growth and independence of the loved one, not trying to control them or keep them dependent. His words resonated deeply with me, crystallizing concepts I had intuitively felt but never managed to articulate clearly. Parallel to the family therapeutic work, I began an intensive process of rebuilding my professional career that had been shaken by maternal sabotage. With Claudia's help and my network of professional contacts, I developed a strategy to discreetly explain what had happened at my dream company, focusing on the message that a family misunderstanding had occurred that did not reflect my professional competence or integrity. I discovered, to my relief, that bizarre situations occasionally happen in the corporate world, and that most human resources professionals had witnessed at least some strange stories throughout their careers. I secured an informal meeting with Ricardo, the director who had interviewed my mother, where I calmly explained the entire situation and presented solid references from previous jobs that proved my competence and character. Beatrice, obviously that situation was extremely unusual, but I appreciate your honesty in coming here to clarify the facts, he said after hearing my complete explanation. Unfortunately, the specific position has already been filled, but I would be happy to consider you for future opportunities that arise in the company. Although I didn't recover that specific opportunity, I left the meeting with my professional dignity restored, and with the door open for future possibilities at the company that still represented my ideal career goal. More importantly, the process of directly confronting the consequences of the sabotage gave me confidence to approach other similar companies without carrying the emotional weight of shame that had paralyzed me for weeks. 3 months after the sabotaged interview incident, I secured an even better position at a competing company that offered not only the same level of responsibility I was seeking, but also a 20% higher salary and more attractive benefits. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. My mother's attempt to sabotage my career had eventually led to an even better opportunity than the one she had destroyed. On my first day of work, I wore the same suit I had worn on that fateful morning, but this time as a symbol of overcoming rather than a painful reminder. My new colleagues welcomed me warmly. My immediate supervisor showed genuine confidence in my abilities, and for the first time in months, I felt I was exactly where I should be professionally. During lunch with my new team, a colleague commented on how confident and determined I seemed, qualities she had noticed since the interview. I've been through some challenging situations recently that taught me a lot about setting priorities and staying focused on what really matters, I replied without going into details, but feeling genuine pride in how I had handled a crisis that could have destroyed me emotionally. The whole experience had made me a stronger professional and a person more aware of my own limits and needs. Parallel to my professional success, my relationship with my mother slowly evolved toward a healthier dynamic, although the process was filled with relapses and moments of tension that constantly tested my determination to maintain the established boundaries. I moved into my own apartment 2 months after starting the new job, a transition that provoked tears and dramatization from Marta, but was essential for my emotional independence and personal development. We established a visitation schedule, bi-weekly Sunday lunches, and a weekly phone call that allowed me to maintain family contact without excessively exposing myself to manipulative behaviors that still occasionally emerged when she felt insecure or neglected. During one of these visits, approximately 4 months after the incident, my mother finally offered a genuine apology that acknowledged both the severity of her actions and the emotional impact they had caused. "Daughter, I know it took me a long time to fully admit it, but what I did at your interview was terrible and unjustifiable," she said with tears that seemed sincere. "I'm doing individual therapy and starting to understand how my own issues led me to hurt you this way." Although I appreciated the apology, I made it clear that forgiveness would be a gradual process that would depend on consistent behavioral changes over time, not just words or promises. "Mom, I appreciate your words, but rebuilding trust requires consistent actions over months and years, not just an apology," I responded with the direct honesty I had learned in therapy sessions. 6 months after the interview incident, I was in a completely different position, professionally fulfilled, emotionally stronger, living independently and maintaining a limited but functional family relationship with clear and respected boundaries. I still occasionally did individual therapy to process residual aspects of the trauma and to continue developing healthy relationship skills, but I felt I had completely regained control over my own life. During a conversation with Claudia, who remained my main source of support and external perspective, I reflected on how that terrible experience had eventually become a catalyst for profound personal growth. It's strange to say this, but I think my mother did me an unintentional favor, I confessed during a happy hour celebrating my first promotion at the new job. If she hadn't done something so extreme, I probably would never have recognized the manipulative patterns or developed the courage to establish appropriate boundaries. Claudia smiled knowingly. Sometimes the worst situations force us to make changes we've avoided for years out of fear or family guilt. Her words perfectly captured my experience. The sabotage had been devastating at the time, but it had also broken a cycle of emotional dependence that had limited my personal development for decades. A year later, my life had stabilized into a new normality that was much healthier than anything I had experienced before. I was promoted again at work, was dating a wonderful man whom my mother had only met once under controlled circumstances and hadn't tried to sabotage, and had developed deeper friendships based on honesty and mutual support, instead of the superficial dynamics I had tolerated when I still lived under constant maternal influence. Marta continued her individual therapy and had shown genuine progress in controlling manipulative impulses, although she still occasionally tried to test the limits I had established. During our last family lunch, she told me about painting classes she had started and a volunteer group that helped her feel useful and fulfilled in ways that didn't depend on controlling my life. "I'm learning to be proud of your achievements without feeling that they diminish my own importance," she said, demonstrating insight that I had never expected from her. "And I'm discovering that I have my own talents and interests that I can develop independently of what you do." Although I maintained appropriate caution, I felt hopeful that our family relationship could eventually evolve into something genuinely healthy and mutually respectful. Reflecting on this entire journey during a solitary walk in a park near my apartment, I realized that the experience of being sabotaged by my own mother, as painful as it had been, taught me lessons about personal boundaries, authenticity in relationships, and professional resilience that I probably wouldn't have learned any other way. The image of my mother leaving that interview room still caused a tightness in my stomach when I recalled it, but no longer with the same devastating intensity that had dominated my life for months. Instead, it had become a powerful reminder of the importance of protecting my own integrity and never allowing family love to be used as an excuse for abusive or controlling behavior. If someone had told me this story a year ago, I would never have believed that a mother could sabotage her child in this way. I murmured to the wind that swayed the trees around me, but I also wouldn't have believed that I would be strong enough to survive, grow, and eventually prosper after such a profound betrayal. The emotional scar would always be there, but it had become part of a story of overcoming rather than an open wound that controlled my actions and emotions. Today, when young colleagues ask me for advice on how to deal with difficult families or challenging work situations, I always share the most important lesson I learned during that dark period. You cannot control the actions of other people, even when those people are family, but you can always control your own response and the consequences you choose to implement. It's a philosophy that transformed not just my relationship with my mother, but all areas of my life where previously I had tolerated inappropriate behavior out of fear of confrontation or loss. The sabotaged interview became, paradoxically, the best present my mother ever gave me. Not because she intended to give me anything positive, but because it forced my growth in a way that gentle encouragement never could have achieved. And although I would never recommend this experience to anyone, I am genuinely grateful for the strength and clarity I developed as a result of surviving one of the most profound betrayals that anyone can imagine. Did you like Beatrice's story? Then subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on the screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.